Well, hello and welcome back. I'm Guy Stevens, the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. And this is AASR Live, our live series we do every 2 weeks. And on this series, we have all sorts of guests, and we have a very special guest joining us today that I'll tell you about in just a moment. But to tell you a little bit about the Alliance, if you're not familiar with who we are and what we do, started the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint about 4 years ago now. Time has just continued to move. Started the Alliance really initially around the issue of restraint seclusion happening in schools across the country. Our mission continued to grow, and we focus on not only restraint seclusion, but restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, all the things that are often being done to kids, very often in the name of behavior. It's even really much broader than that. We're concerned about these things happening in lots of places that they happen, the troubled teen industry and the mental health settings, and really all across the world. We have firm beliefs that we can do better for people. And when we can do better for people, we need to do better for people. Our vision in terms of school is about safer schools for students, teachers, and staff. So excited about that. And let me tell you, I am extremely excited today. And you've heard me say this before. Every week, or every 2 weeks, you hear me say, really excited about our guest. And I mean it. I'm always really excited about our guests because we have some really fabulous guests that join us. But today, I'm extremely excited to have Chazz Lewis joining us for a special discussion. And as I say, Chazz Lewis, you probably know him by Mr. Chazz. And he is going to be joining us and really kind of sharing some of his thoughts and background. We're going to have a good conversation interview. And of course, as always, this session will be recorded. So it will be available live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We also make it available as an audio podcast. That usually comes a few days after. And we encourage you, whenever we do these, share them with other families, share them with friends, share them with coworkers, share them, if you're a family member, share them with a teacher. If you're a teacher, share them with your families. There's a lot of really great content that we cover here. And again, it's all kind of in the name of, how do we make the world a better place? And so it happens with you helping to share and really get that information out there. So with that, let me skip right to what's really important today and introduce to you our very special guest. Really excited here to have Chazz Lewis, and Chazz's mission is really about helping adults truly see, guide, and trust children. He's pushing the needle a little closer towards world peace, and I agree with you. You're doing really amazing work. With the approach that not only he takes, but that he talks about, that he advocates for, and that he's pushing for change. He's an educational specialist, a parent coach, a conscientious discipline practitioner, content creator, and of course goes by Mr. Chazz, and even has a song to prove it. And I've got to let you know, Chazz. So we had the fortune of being together recently in Houston for a conference, and I had a chance to catch up with you before you went on. And of course, was in your session. I think I may have heard this song before, but I got to tell you, I flew home on Wednesday night, 2 really big, full, busy days, feeling pretty tired. I got home around midnight, and you know what was in my head?
What's my name?
Mr. Chazz. What's my name? And I told my wife, I'm like, I've got the Mr. Chazz song stuck in my head. So at any rate, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's, I know this conversation's been a long time coming. We met a while ago at the Mona de la Hook training. And so it's exciting to be able to have this conversation and talk to your audience and hopefully really help a lot of people out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I am equally as excited. I guess it was probably about a year and a half ago or so. I think we met in Virginia for an event that Mona de la Hook was doing. And that was fantastic. And, to me already at that point, I knew of your work and who you are. And, I end up, meeting people through this work that, not to overuse the word as the Super Bowl taught me, but are rock stars, are people that are out there doing amazing work that, as you said, in kind of the intro there about pushing the needle, trying to make change. And that's really what we're all about too, is, how do we make change? And, I had the great fortune to sit in your presentation the other day. And although I wasn't able to see all of your presentations, that was really tough. I learned a lot more about you than I already knew. So I knew a bit from seeing a lot of your videos. I know the kinds of things that you talk about. I know a lot of the messaging, but I learned even more about kind of your background at that point. So that might be a really great starting point for our audience. Of course, we talked about you being an educational specialist. You were a teacher. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of how you came to the field of education? And we'll start with that, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your journey.
Oh, yeah. So honestly, when I first started working in the early childhood, I really didn't know what I was doing. And it was really one of those situations where you're just kind of like thrown in there, and I was with some veterans, but I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Um, and I started off really using a lot of the same techniques that I grew up with the punishment and shame. And I was in a Montessori classroom, and so while I am grateful that I was able to learn a lot about Maria Montessori's method.
Mhm,
The way there were were parts that were being implemented really well, and there were some things that I just recognized as being in the classroom that I really wanted to change. There were things that were happening, the things that that I was doing, following their lead and just following the lead of just how
mhm,
I
mhm,
was, grew up, that I didn't like, and I decided that that wasn't the teacher I want to be. Let alone that wasn't the person that I wanted to
mhm,
be.
mhm,
Um, and so that's when I made the decision, like, okay, I need to find a different way. There's got to be a different way to guide children other than just yelling louder, taking things away, punishing greater, trying to just scare them into compliance to get them from point A to point B.
mhm.
Um, and that was, a long journey. It didn't happen. It's not like I read a book and then I was like, okay, I got it now, I got it
Light
down.
switch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There had a lot of aha eureka moments where I was like, wow, that's so, I never thought about doing it that way. But so the practice and the implementation of
Mhm,
it
mhm,
is a lot more difficult than just reading about it.
mhm,
Um, and so that's kind of the beginning
mhm,
of
mhm,
my journey,
mhm,
I'd
mhm.
say, kind of in the classroom.
Sure. So I want to dig a little bit deeper, but before I do, I want to do something I usually do. And I think I was just so excited to dive right into this conversation. I didn't. And that is, I wanted to ask people that are on live with us now to tell us who you are and where you're from. Chaz, we have a really diverse and amazing audience here. We've got a lot of parents of kids, kids that have often been through very punitive, things like restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, all of that. We have a lot of self advocates, a lot of autistic self advocates. We also have a tremendous number of teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals. We have related professionals, OTs, and speech language folks. Really, a really broad group. And I would say the thing that brings us together is this idea like we can do better. And that's always been like one of my guiding philosophies. And of course, I go back to that famous quote, but is the idea of like we do how we can, and when we know better we do better. That's what this is all about, and what this work is all about. So in that vein, I'll just say to you that we typically have people from all over the world that join in, and it's really amazing because I think back when I was young and a long distance call across the country was a big deal, and now we routinely have people joining us from all over the country, and it's all over the country and all over the nation. I always tell people, I'm like, usually sometime in the next few minutes we have people from New Zealand come online, or Australia, or lots of folks from Canada. And already I see people that are
Yeah.
jumping in. Michelle, who's from Nebraska, a regular here at the Alliance Live. We have somebody here from Ontario, a teacher from Kalamazoo, in my neck of the woods here from Maryland. Um, and Michelle just said we're building an army, but people from all over. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we really do have a great audience that you'll be reaching. Of course, you have a tremendous worldwide reach as well. But just want to let you know that people from all over are going to be watching this today, and I'm really excited about it. So
And
let me go ahead.
yeah, something I want to say about that. Like, I really love that, and because when I first started on my journey, it was like I didn't really have a community around me. There was no one in my building was really kind of on the same a journey that I was on, and the people around me, the people that I was expected to learn from, were people who had not chosen to kind of hang up the shame and fear and punishment.
Mhm.
And so this is huge. I'm so thankful that we live in a time where it is so much more accessible. People, it's so much easier to kind of build community, find other people who are on this journey with you, and you can get tips and tricks and strategies and perspective from people all over the world. And so I just love that we're here together, and I love that I'm able to be in a position to kind of give, because I know that when I started, like, I didn't have that. So yeah,
Yeah,
just
no,
happy to be
I hear you. And I often tell people that when I first started the Alliance, the very first mission, if you would, we hadn't formalized the mission statement, but my initial mission was I wanted people that were going through something similar to what we were going through to know they weren't alone. And I wanted them to know they could do things to influence change. And that's where we started. Was like, it was really isolating to be experiencing some of the same things. Or even if you're a change maker or a disruptor, as we sometimes refer to, it's really hard if everyone around you is kind of sticking to the way things have been done, and it's
yeah,
isolating. We just got back, you and I both, from a conference in Houston, the Creating Trauma Sensitive Schools Conference, which was held by the Attachment and Trauma Network. And I tell you, one of the best things about being there is the community, is the amazing change makers that you've known online or you've talked to in the past, or whatever it may be. And I absolutely love and value how authentic, accessible. Just the fact that, again, these people that, as I started this journey, were like, these are just rock stars. The fact that I could sit down with you, Chazz, and have these discussions, it means so much. It means so much to me. It means so much to our community. So I'm right there with you. And again, we've got people already saying, love and share your work. Somebody else here from Canada, Detroit. Hey, there we go. My first Australian here today. So again, this is such a honor and pleasure to be able to do
yes,
this with you. But wow, what it is to be able to have this kind of community, and I really appreciate your support in that.
yeah, happy to be here.
So let me dig a little bit deeper, and I don't always dig this deep, but I think it might be interesting. And of course, we were kind of preparing quickly here, and then sometimes I ask, like, is there anything I can or can't ask? So hopefully, I don't ask anything I can't.
There's nothing that you can ask me anything.
Okay, sounds
Ask me
good.
anything.
So I am thinking about, we talked about the beginning of your journey in terms of education, but I want to go back even a little bit further. Um, what was education like for you?
Yeah,
What was school like for you? And I asked that question with kind of some thought behind it, but I'll let you address it, and
yeah,
kind of hear where you go.
yeah. Well, I grew up with ADHD,
Mm,
and so it, a lot of I received a lot of the shame and
mm,
punishment, and I grew up being, getting whoopings, getting spanked, whatever you want to call it.
mm,
And so I very much know what that felt like. I also know how ineffective it was for me, and I also remember one of the things that I want to like. I was kind of been reflecting over the past week, and going to the conference in Houston, and I did a little interview, and it just caused me to kind of reflect even more of just that, one of the things that I was kind of shamed for, or criticized or punished for, or got in trouble for a lot, was I was a talker. I
mm.
was always talking, and I was a busybody, but I was also just like talking, 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 and so
I would tell you that was hard for me to believe, but it's not.
exactly. And how I see it, how I see things, and what has kind of helped me to help my perspective with children who have a hard time, is that, like, everyone's got a superpower.
Mm,
Everyone has a superpower, and I really truly believe that. Now, what happens is that when you first get your superpower, even when you watch the Marvel movies,
mm,
when someone first gets their superpower, they're and even as adults first getting their superpower, they're like fumbling all over the place, they're messing up, they're accidentally hurting people, and there's always like a woe is me, because they don't know how to use their superpower yet. And that's what it felt like growing up. And now imagine a child who's new to everything, and they have these superpowers, they have these really strong character traits, or these really
mhm,
strong just yeah, character traits, things that are about them that are really their superpowers. But in the beginning of their life, it often causes harm. They don't know how to use it. They don't know how to hone it. And what superheroes need, what always happens, what they need is one, they always need a mentor, right? They always need a mentor. And so, like,
Mhm.
Spider-Man's mentor was like Tony Stark, right? They always need a mentor to kind of help them, kind of guide them along the journey. And they also need time to practice and to make mistakes, right? And so, you could really watch any kind of superhero like origin story,
Mhm.
and it shows that. And that's what it really feels like for me. And yeah, talking being my superpower, not really know
Mhm.
how to use it. I didn't really have mentors who knew how to kind of help me with my superpower. Um, and so it was really difficult growing up. And one of my goals as someone who's tasked with being a mentor of a
Mhm.
lot of people, of adults, of children, of people, is to really hone in and tap into, people's superpowers. And I recognize a lot of times when I'm having conversation with the people, they'll look at their thing, one of their superpowers, they'll say like, oh, I'm too passionate
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
this, or I'm like, that's a superpower. That's something that's not a bad thing. Now, you may have been criticized for it in the past, and there may be opportunities for you to improve on how you utilize your passion, how you utilize all that energy, but it's not a bad thing. And so I really, you know, try to help people understand that and
Mhm.
use that. And with children, it's also a little bit more regulating for me. So, because when a child is a busybody, or they're doing a lot of name calling or whatever it is, I really try to see, like, from the perspective, like, this is, one, this is it's not a bad kid, it's a child who's having a hard time,
Mhm. Mhm.
often having a hard time learning how to use their own power.
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
and so that's the way that I see it, and that's the way that, and it's that perspective is really informed by just the way I grew up. Now, as an adult, I make my living talking, right? Like,
Mhm.
as a teacher, you do a lot of talking and moving, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to, stay in education. Honestly, when I came and when I started working in early childhood, it wasn't really oh, this is what we do for the rest of my life. I'm going to, move the world closer to world peace. I'm going to save the world. It's not
Mhm.
what I was thinking at
Right.
all.
Right.
Honestly, I didn't really want to be in education just because of my experiences in
Right.
education. And it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to go to education and change it. It was like, I'm in here. And then I started to see, like, wow, I started to see how big this was and how
Mhm.
important this was, and how I could use my superpowers and understand those kids who were having a hard time. The
Mhm.
other,
Mhm.
one of the
Mhm.
reasons why I decided to stay is like, this is actually something I really want to do, is that, like, I noticed that there was a lot of teachers who had a hard time relating to those kids
Right.
who have a hard time. And I could relate to it because it's like
Mhm.
I was always in trouble growing up. And so I could really, it's easier for me. It seems like it's easier for me to kind of give that empathy that that child really needs than, some of the other teachers.
Sure.
Um, and so now I'm making a living off of talking, and I get comments on my videos, and people come up to me, like, at the conference, like, people come up to me and talk to me about how I have impacted their relationship with their daughter or their son, or how, like, my content has been life changing for them.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and that is just, it's been so 360, like, it's
Sure.
been such a full circle kind of moment for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I can't
yeah.
say I'm surprised to hear that. I mean, one of the things I love about a lot of the content that you produce is it's these short pieces of wisdom that are so meaningful. I was trying to describe it to someone the other day about your videos, and you say these things in such a way that when you get done, it's like, well, yeah, of course, or else it's the hadn't really thought about it from that perspective before. So I think you've got an ability to communicate. I think that is amazing, and I love this analogy that you've used. I remember, I've got two kids. I've got a daughter who is 13. I've got a son that's 17. My son is neurodivergent. When he was very young, I always saw his differences as things that were in many cases strengths. Some of them led to challenges. Some of them were, it's hard to be neurodivergent in a neurotypical world that wants to make you neurotypical. That shouldn't be the goal, right? Our goal should not be to make everybody the same, but rather when we find people that have these individual differences that, and again, I mean, some of them can be struggles, but there are differences as well that really can be, can be gifts and can be really, assets for people. So I remember always trying to make that point with them. But, even thinking about, myself here, I mean, it was probably my hyper focus and persistence that led to the formation of a group. I mean, Chaz, I'd been working the same job for 25 years with no idea of changing my career. And I started the Alliance because somebody had done something to my son, and I could not break my train of focus. I had to do something. I had to do something to make a change. So I think when we're able to follow those differences that you talk about, I mean, that's huge. But it's I love the way you put that story. So what took you, because I knew a little bit about your backstory, but and I'll say, and you probably can back this up as well. Often the people that I've come across that are in roles like yours and doing work like the work that we're doing here kind of collectively are people that had a hard time in school, or it's kind of surprising when you think about it. It's like, how do you go from being a student that had a hard time and was on the wrong side of being misunderstood to suddenly like, hey, I want to be a teacher? So what was that moment for you that kind of got you? I mean, what got you down the road of education to say, oh, well, let me dip my toes in this, and knowing that at the time you made that decision, because we all are making these decisions when we don't have fully developed brains, right? We are 17 years old and supposed to figure out what we want to do with our lives without a fully developed prefrontal cortex. And of course, nobody tells us that. So what did it look like for you? How did you decide to kind of take this path?
Oh man, that is a question. So honestly, I didn't. Again, like I said, I didn't. When I started working with kids, it wasn't this big grand scheme of, it's to be in education and to be a world changer or to change anyone's life. It was honestly just, my friend had got a job at an early childhood center, and they said they were looking for more people, and I was looking for work, and so I was like, oh, that sounds like something I could do. And I had previously volunteered and done some work with some kids, and I enjoyed it. Like, oh, that's something I like. I like kids.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I wasn't like, I love kids, but like, I like kids. I could be around kids. And then I really spent time. And I really saw, number one, the the impact. It was just so clear to me, like how, one, the impact that you're making in these kids' lives,
Mm-hmm.
that like you are really impacting them and almost like really programming them in their most like formative years. And I was really, when I first started working with children, it was really just 3 to 5 year olds. And like I could see the impact I was making. That was inspiring to me. Two, um you know, even though I didn't know what I was doing, I guess apparently other people did think I knew what I was doing, because they would always give me like the kids, like even my seniors, like the people who were like the veterans, they would give the kids who like were having a hard time. They didn't really
Work
know
your
what to do.
magic, right?
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
hey, yeah, figure this out. And I'm
right.
like, I don't know what to do. So, and those kids really did challenge me, and it was tough. And I want to just reemphasize the point that like those superpowers, the powers that the children have, that they are challenges. They
Mhm.
usually
Right.
equate to challenges in the younger year because it's just so much power. It's just so much for them to handle that they don't know how to like really utilize.
Mhm.
Um, and so um it was things like that. And then I started learning when it was me kind of embarking on this journey of just like, oh, there's a different way to do this. And
Mhm.
that was a thing that was just like really exciting for me, of just like finding, yeah, like just different ways to guide children without using the like punishments and shame. And that was just inspiring, and people started coming to me and started coming to me for advice. Now meanwhile, this is all happening with me like in my professional setting. Now my family life, And what my parents were telling really mostly my mom, because she's kind of been the one who's always kind of been on me my whole life. And really involved and really trying to be involved and really just wanting me to be successful in life. She's like, you're at this, you're working in early childhood, like you're not making a lot of money, like go pretty much like go get a real job.
Mhm.
And go get a job, and or she does work in the government. She's like, hey, I got connections, like you can come work in the government. And I was also interested in government, and I was going to school for political science at
Right.
first, and so it was not like it was something I was uninterested in doing, but I just didn't have that passion for
Right.
it. I had an interest for it, but I just
Y
didn't have a passion
you
for it.
you know, as somebody that worked in government for a long time, and I did, um, it might have killed your passion.
And
Government can
so
be a tough place to be. I mean,
and
I spent a good part of my career in government, in university settings, and again, great jobs, great benefits, great stability. But
right.
this work that we're doing here now, there's such a need, and it's so important. And I mean, the passion. I mean, I know the passion you have for the work that you're doing. Uh, I hope your mother is very proud of all that you're doing now and the lives that you're changing, because there is no greater there's no greater work than making a positive difference in others' lives, and you're doing that, man. You are the real deal. Sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
mean to cut you off, but I was
No,
just
no, you're good.
yeah.
So I actually interned. I actually did a summer job because I was like, yeah, she makes a good point. Like the amount of money that I was making, and then I was going, and then she's like, oh, like you can intern here and kind of do that for the summer. So I kind of took a little bit of break from working in education. I was like, oh yeah, I'm making like twice as much money to intern, and I'm not even going to have that much responsibility. Like, okay, yeah, money. And also too, as a kid, I want the white picket fence, I want the American dream,
Mhm.
and in education, you don't, that's not really, you struggle
Right,
financially.
right,
It's
sure.
kind of part of the job, and I understood that. And so I did the internship, and it was draining.
Mm.
It was like, oh man, this is like school was like, I cannot do that. Like, I'm
Right.
surprised this, but I was making bank. I was
Right.
making money. Like, that's the most money that I had ever seen. And even when I started, working back in education, again, I was, a lead teacher, and I would had so much more responsibility. I still wasn't making, so I was making like $16 an hour
Mm.
um for the internship. And I literally went there and just I was just pretty much a body there. It was just
Mm,
like,
mhm.
and I hear a lot of government work is like that.
I mean,
But
don't get me wrong, I know some great people in government work.
right, not
It
to down government workers,
no, no,
but
no, and, I mean, part of it might be, I mean, I mean, I'll say, I mean, an ADHD mind, a neurodivergent mind
right,
may not be best suited in a very, structured government. I mean, and again, I mean, I know people that do wonderful work, but, yeah, it's a totally different beast.
a 100%. And so I really, to sum it all up, I figured out that that was not right for me.
Right.
And then, but I had this other thing that I was doing that was just like there was just this internal thing that was like just screaming out like this is where you belong, like you belong in education.
Mm, mhm.
And I just couldn't ignore that, and would work all day, and by the end of the day I'd be exhausted, but like so content and fulfilled. And I'd
Mhm.
wake up the next morning. I'm not a morning person, and
Me
so
either.
I'd wake up and I'm like, oh, I'm like, I don't want to get up, I don't want to do anything, like I need to sleep longer. I'm gonna be laying in bed, and then I'd be contemplating and thinking about okay, well, what is my day gonna actually look like? And actually thinking about what I had planned for the day for my kids, and the impact, what are the goals that I had with each of them, and the connections that I had with each of them. And that literally got me up
Mhm.
out of bed. That literally got me out of the bed and woke me up, and it pushed me out the door.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so
mhm,
that's when I was like, this is where I belong. And
mhm.
then at some point I kind of rationalized it. Okay, but I still want there's that survival thing. Okay, but I'm gonna be making I'm still gonna not gonna be making enough money to
Right,
meet
right.
my financial goals, even though I have this passion. I was like, okay, I can kind of I can I can make that trade-off. For me, I don't need a fancy lifestyle. Like
Mhm,
for me, maybe other people do feel like they need that,
mhm,
but like for me, I don't need a fancy lifestyle, and I'd rather be I'm going to be like working 8 hours a day. Like I'd rather be doing something that I enjoy and I'm
mhm, mhm,
fulfilled by. And the other part that kind of like was inspiring is like, you know what, because I'm so passionate about what I do, I'm going to do put a 210% in every day.
mhm,
I'm going to
mhm.
Which is going to like cause me to grow and learn in this thing, and it's going to make me great at this thing because I'm so passionate about it. I'm so focused on it that I can actually be great at this thing. And I think, when you become great at something, and like you learn a lot because, I'm so interested in it, like you are able to give that value to other people, and
Mhm, mhm.
there's an opportunity to make some kind of money
Yeah,
that way.
yeah, unexpected things can happen, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and I think, I mean, the important thing is like money is not your goal. Somehow, when you're just doing these amazing things, things will figure out a way to work.
right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, tell me a little bit more about kind of the transformation. So, you know, school's not easy. It's not always a great environment. You decide to go down this path, but then there's all the pressures of, and I trust me, I grew up in a similar time. Like, you should go into computers or medicine. I mean, like there were these expectations of the things you should do. And like, I got out of college and I went and worked for a local government, then eventually the federal government, and then eventually a university. It was kind of like, that was a pathway. It was really secure. But
Yeah,
let's talk a little bit then about, where, because you got in, you had these experiences in early childhood. You saw things that weren't working, but you saw things that did work. You began to develop your style. People began to recognize what you were doing. And then
yeah.
how did it blossom into Mr. Chazz, Mr. Chazz? When did it go to suddenly, not only, were you learning this and being recognized, but suddenly you tell me about the birth of kind of the online, work that
Yeah,
you were doing and all of that.
yeah. So I'd been doing this for a while. I was working in the classroom. People were asking for advice. I was sharing advice, and then the light bulb went off. I was like, oh wow, I could like actually support teachers. If I support teachers and
Mhm,
in schools, like my impact can be exponential, and like that's something I really want to do. I really want to just, really help more people on this from the journey that I went on. And before people started asking me for advice, I didn't really see myself as that guy. It was just like, I'm just here to learn and grow and get better and better and better
mhm,
and
mhm,
better and,
mhm,
and continue learning. Um, and so I was doing and that's when I was, the role that I was educational specialist. So I was
mhm,
doing that for a while. And then the pandemic happened. And then that's when I was like, the teachers went home. Most of the teachers, most of the kids went home, and the job just looked a lot different. And, really parents became the 24/7 everything for their children.
mhm,
And, I was online, and, I really started to see how they were struggling. They were kind of communicating through like social media. I'm just like, oh, like all these different things. Like, can you believe my kid is like drawing on the wall and all these things? And a lot of the struggles that I saw people talking about were struggles that like I went through and like had
mhm,
grown a perspective about. Whether it was the hard way or
mhm,
messing up a bunch of times, making a lot of mistakes, and finding different ways to do things. And that's when I was like, I want to find a way. There's got to be another way for me to kind of share the lessons that I had learned along my journey and share
mhm,
them with
mhm,
parents. And that's when I started to make little like TikToks. And my
mhm,
thought process was, if I can make like short, bite-sized videos that are fun, easy to consume, but you feel like you have a new tool at the end of it,
right.
or your perspective has grown a little bit, that can make a pretty significant impact. And so that's what I started to do. And then I just started to share it on Instagram and Facebook, and then that turned into the podcast because really for two reasons. One, I wanted to, the short little bite-sized videos are great, but there's still always going to be a little bit some nuance that's going to
Mhm,
be
mhm, mhm,
lost in a 1 minute video.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
that's why I do an hour-long podcast, so we can really dive into nuance. And the other piece was to bring on new people so that people could find if you're embarking on this journey, you
Right.
can find teachers from all around the world that resonate with you, that you can kind of bring into your kind of ecosystem of community
Mm-hmm.
of teachers that can help you along on your journey. Because again, that's something that I really, was kind of struggling to find in the beginning.
It's so
Um,
important. Yeah.
so that's kind of how things happen.
Yeah, and then hundreds of thousands of followers later, or I don't even know what your numbers look like right now. By the way, maybe Courtney behind the scenes can find the link to your podcast and share that as well.
Mr. Chazz's Leadership, Parenting, and Teaching Podcast is what it's called.
Okay, perfect. So we'll try to get that link in the chat here. So I've got to. I think we've kind of gone through a good arc of kind of like where your story came from.
Sure.
I know from kind of tuning in and watching that there's a lot of things that you're passionate about. One of the things I've seen you talk about a lot is corporal punishment, hitting kids, kind of adversive discipline. Can you talk to me a little bit more about kind of, one, I know what your views are, but can you share with the audience kind of what your views are, how they were informed, and what you're hoping to provide to parents and educators? I mean, we still have 19 states that allow corporal punishment in public schools. And I'll share with you, I grew up very young. I went to a couple of religious schools where I was subjected to corporal punishment at very young ages for doing things that just do not make sense now. Didn't make sense then. So, having been through some of those experiences, can understand even, now many, 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 many years later, the harm it can have. So you can talk a little bit about that issue, and we'll get into some of the other things that are really important to you.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I grew up getting spanked, and it just never it never felt effective
Mm-hmm.
when it was happening. I just was just PO'd at the end of it. There was no really me reflecting on my action. There was no real learning that came from it. And so, when I started working with children, I didn't really have a strong stance on it. Again, it wasn't something that I really deeply reflected on until I started working with children. I started like, hey, I don't want to, like, if I don't want to, like, if it doesn't feel good for me to yell, like, why would I? And we weren't allowed to hit them. So they would just, and it's not like something I really wanted to do, which is something that was just never on the table.
Okay.
But as I reflect more, as I started to like learn other ways to do things, like it just the spanking and the hitting of children, like it just made less and less sense to me, even outside of all the research. Yeah, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there's lots and lots of research to support that spanking is harmful, reasons that you shouldn't do it. But honestly, people who are already like really believe in spanking, the research probably isn't going to change their mind.
Right.
Um,
Kids
it
need
just
consequences. Kids need to feel the pain of there's a lot of that, and a lot
yeah.
of mentality. I mean, I I remember sitting in a hearing one time. I think it was in Maine, and some lawmakers were talking about things like restrained seclusion. They were talking about how this is a lawmaker in public saying, well, I heard Maine has some of the higher rates of restrained seclusion, but we also have some of the lower crime rates, so it must be working. It's just like the the connections that people draw. And it's interesting. We were were you in Lori's opening keynote by any chance? I don't know if you had a chance to
I
work.
was, yes,
Okay,
yes,
okay.
yes.
Yeah, as we sat and listened to it, and I've known Lori for some time, and think so highly of her. But even and I told Lori, I'm like, you did such a fantastic job. I've seen her speak many times, and for some reason this one really stuck out at me. But even when I've heard her message, I was sitting there and something new popped in my head, and we were talking about consequences and discipline. And of course, you talked in your session a bit about the brain and, the brain science behind this. And, we always hear people say things like, well, we punish them to teach them a lesson, or we're going to teach them a lesson, or they need consequences. And, of course, what we know is that when kids are punished, it is dysregulating. It's dysregulating to be punished. And when you become dysregulated, your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain, does what? It goes offline. So you're not teaching at a time when somebody's prefrontal cortex is offline. And it just had this, kind of moment where I'm like, it just makes no sense what people say when it's like, well, we want to teach them a lesson. If you want to teach them, then reframe the word discipline to mean what it should mean, which is to teach, and actually teach people skills, teach them abilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Too, I've been in the position where it's like child did something, some kind of undesirable behavior,
Mm,
something, and I punished the child or made the child feel bad.
mhm,
I was just ready that I was
mhm.
wagging my finger, yelling at the child, and it never really like solves anything. And it
Right,
just,
right.
like I've been in a situations enough times to just recognize that it just creates more of an issue, and that and as I started to learn more about like the body and the brain, like I can now recognize more what was happening, and like what is happening is that that they are like that still stays in their body. Like
Mhm, mhm.
it doesn't, after you like punish them and make them feel bad for what they did, like when you're ready to move on from this because you feel like justified, okay, like I've punished you enough, you feel bad, all right, let's move on. They're still in
That's right.
that like
That's right. That's
mode,
right.
and now I got to deal with that, and like
Right.
what are you gonna punish them more to get them
Right.
to like stop
Right.
crying? I'll get
Right.
or I'll give you something to cry about. Is that's usually when that comes out, and it's just so counterproductive.
Yep. And
Uh,
you don't punish pain or trauma out of kids. You punish pain and trauma into kids. And
right.
and of course, what's the effect of that? You're putting them down into a defensive state. You're making them feel unsafe. All those things happen, and none of it's beneficial. It's not beneficial to serving the purpose. I did want to just share here real quick. You may remember Joe Brummer from
Oh,
the
Joe.
so Joe is apparently joining us here as well for this. And Joe said, "What's my name?" And I would get up and dance if, well, it would be bad. So I won't. But I do want to take a minute to pause here and say, Chazz, I can keep you busy with questions all day, but I want our audience to have a chance to interact with you as well
Oh, okay,
and
yeah,
ask some
yeah.
questions. So if you're watching live, feel free, if you have a question, to put it in the chat, and I'll try to get to some of those questions as well as we go. So moving on, while we're waiting for people to kind of think about some questions they have, tell me what else. I mean, tell me what else are some of your core beliefs around the shift that needs to happen in the world. I mean, it's not just education, right? What are some of your core beliefs? I mean, I hear you talk about them a lot, and you talk about them all often in these, kind of, these bite-sized pieces. And I was telling somebody the other day, there was a show on many moons ago when I was younger. It was a talk show. It was Arsenio Hall, and he had the segment called "Things That Make You Go Hmm." And I said, Chazz does that to you. He says things, and you're just like, hmm. You just begin to reflect and think about things a little differently. So, I mean, what are some of the things that are really important to you? What are some of
Mm,
the issues that you really focus on?
yeah. Before I even go into like strategies, because hopefully people ask questions and you'll ask about like, different how to handle certain situations. I dive deeper into strategies, but like the most important thing that I think of all my messages is that perfect doesn't exist.
Hmm.
Avoid being a perfectionist, be an improvementist. The goal isn't to be perfect every day. The goal is to improve a little every day. And the reason why that's the most important thing is because you're going to you're going to read books, you're going to listen to podcasts, you're going to hear new strategies, you're going to try different things. And, some things may go like, oh, wow, that worked way better than I thought it would. And some things are like, wow, did that not go the way I thought it was going to go. And because mistakes are an essential part of the learning process. That's another one. Mistakes are an essential part of the learning process. That when you go into the class, you try something new, you should expect to make mistakes. Like that is a part of learning. And that's why children are, constantly making mistakes all the time.
Hmm.
And they're new to everything in the world, right? They're new to relationships, they're new to the environments, they're new to our routines, they're new to us, they're new to each other. Like, and so we should really expect mistakes. And really why that's so important is because and essential for all the other little strategies that we could talk about is that if you're not able to like give yourself empathy in
Hmm.
these moments where you're trying things, you're going to have a very hard time giving empathy to children.
Yeah.
And what you're going to do is things aren't going to go your way, and you're going to shame yourself, you're going to beat yourself up. Probably some of that programming that you received as a
Hmm.
child is going to pop up. Some of the same things you heard growing up you're going to say to yourself, and that's going to stop you from actually improving, from
Hmm.
actually taking a step. And actually, I had a little mantra that I kind of used to really have to say to myself a lot of the times when
Hmm.
things wouldn't go my way. Someone would I'm teaching them how to,
Mhm,
pour milk or something like that, and they pull the entire pitcher, something like that happens. It happened, can't change it. To really accept that it happened, and
mhm,
there's nothing that I can do to change that in that moment. But what I do have control over is what I do next.
mhm,
What I
mhm.
do in this next moment, I do have control over. So it happened, can't change it. Okay, now what can I do? Now
Right.
what is within my power? I can't go back 5 minutes. If I could go back in time 5 minutes ago and maybe give you a little bit more support with that pouring, or give you the words to say to
Mhm,
solve that problem, or give you, a sensory tool to help you kind of regulate instead of pushing someone, I do it. But
mhm,
that's not
mhm,
the way reality works.
mhm,
So
mhm, mhm,
it
mhm,
happened, can't change it. Give myself empathy, give them empathy, and move on, and
mhm,
solve
mhm,
the
mhm.
problem. And when we're able to do that, they're going to be more able to do that, and they're going to learn how to do that themselves too. A lot of times behaviors happen because misbehaviors, undesired behaviors
Mhm.
happen because they're having a hard time doing
Yep.
that themselves.
Right, right, right. And I think as an adult, even being able to own our own behavior and when we make mistakes, and I think being authentic with a kid and saying, "Hey, I didn't handle that so well." I think that's important. I mean, we all have those moments, and we might not be able to change things, but we certainly all have those moments. I want to get to a couple questions, but before I do,
Yes,
I
see
just want to
so.
ask you one other thing that I've wanted to ask you, and I haven't asked you this before, but of course we focus on restraint, seclusion, and all the negative things that are often done to kids very often in the name of behavior. And one of the things that we find around the use of restraint seclusion is that although at a high level it's really intended as a crisis management intervention, what we find are kids are very often restrained and secluded for misbehave not misbehave excuse me, I didn't mean to say misbehavior, but for um non-compliance, for disrespect, for power struggles, for all sorts of things. And you go from failure to complete a worksheet to suddenly being held down to the ground or put into a room by yourself. Just kind of curious, your take on things like restraint seclusion. And the the one of the biggest changes I think needs to happen, of course, is always in the adult mind shift. And what your thoughts are, and how we shift adult mindsets as well around things like this.
Yeah. Well, I find that that is like it's kind of all in the same conversation of spanking, of yeah, forced isolation. Like it's kind
Mhm.
of all you know we I think that's why it's so important to really, in your mind, to decide and kind of make a commitment not to like use those kind of like
Mhm.
fear, control, shame-based strategies, because and really focus on other ways to guide children, support children, um, because what happens is it comes from our own dysregulation, our own,
Mhm.
like, I don't know what else to do in this moment.
Mhm.
I don't know how else to handle the situation. I'm in kind of my survival mode. I'm in my survival state. And when we're in our own survival state, it's going to be harder for us to offer empathy. Like it
Mhm.
literally will shut off the empathy in our brain when we're just trying to survive. And we
Mhm.
perceive this. Our brain, sometimes doesn't know the difference between a child having a hard time throwing a temper tantrum and like a lion
Right.
bearing down at us, right? Or and sometimes it may even you know those are very two big like extreme examples, but our brain's very old and so it's been programmed that way. But a lot of times it's really more of a like even sometimes judgment of
Mhm.
how my administrator or parent or teacher or even for ourselves, and like because of that judgment, the way that the fear of judgment, like we go to these harmful strategies.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
um
Mhm.
and a lot of times it really comes down to us one not really knowing what else to do,
Right.
and not being able to really manage our own emotions,
Mhm. Mhm.
and not also understanding the behavior a lot of the times too. I say patience really comes from understanding.
Mhm.
um,
Mhm. And even recognizing the impact that our own behavior has, right? I mean, our behavior can be a contagion to a kid. A kid that's, when we come in guns a-blazing and yelling and screaming and agitated, that carries over to any other human being that's on the other side of that.
or
Um,
even sad, or
right. Yep.
even sad,
Yep.
or just frustrated about something that's going on in the building, like, and we're all humans, we're going to have these emotions, we're going to have these feelings. But a lot of times we're not even aware of it. We're not like as conscious of how much those feelings or those things are impacting how we are being in the or the energy that we're giving to children. And
Mhm.
we're really, if you really like understand how contagious energy is, you can see it. Like I've seen it.
Right.
Like I've had bad days. Like there are times where I have bad days, and like I notice that when I'm having a bad day, like it's typically like, the kids are gonna have worse days, the class is gonna have a worse day, and I need to be able to like take a step back and be able to reset. And the reset can look like a lot of different things. It could look like asking for a little like time out of the classroom. It could look like a dance party. It could look like me just doing some self-talk. It could look like me saying, "Hey, co-teacher, I just need you to like handle the classroom for a little bit. I need just some of it." Might be, "Hey, we're gonna go outside. I know it's not the time I normally go outside, but I need some fresh air." Like
Mhm.
whatever that reset looks like. There's a lot of different ways that we could reset, but just really recognizing that. Um, Let me get to these questions.
Yeah,
Can I
yeah,
do
yeah.
that?
So let me bring these up for you, and then I
Okay.
can read them for you. So Moats place the page. How do you manage how it feels when other coworkers who do not agree with your strategies are affecting your students?
So, first thing to remember is that really the only person that we can change is ourselves. That we don't really have the power to make this, to make the child, or to make this other person change really who they are. When we really think about it too, is like I talked about my journey like on
Mhm.
this, and it comes with a lot of mistakes. Like, like this comes with a lot of work. It comes with a lot of work. And if you're on this journey, you can probably appreciate how much work this is to
Mhm.
change, and to expect another person to make that change. It is a big ask. Now, what do we do in this situation? One thing is like who you are and your energy and what you are bringing. It is going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact. People
Mhm.
are going to pay attention. And the other thing is that recognizing that this is a human person, and the reason that their behavior is the way that their behavior is, there's a reason, right? Due to their experiences, due to the cultural background, due to maybe the way that they were trained. Like there are still people who are being trained in like harmful strategies.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
um it, age difference could, there's a lot of reasons why people behave the way that they do. And so to really come from a place of understanding and building a relationship with that person, a
Mhm.
really authentic relationship with that person, you're going to impact, and be able to influence their behavior and the way their perspective more if you have a genuine relationship with that person. And you're also going to be modeling these strategies and really focusing on improving yourself,
Mhm.
and,
Mhm.
and and
Mhm.
come with it like humbly. Like don't come like with, "I have all the answers and I know, do you need to
Right.
stop what you're doing and just listen to me because I know what I'm doing and clearly you don't know what you're doing." Don't come at it like that, because that's gonna be the quickest way for them to for them to like just shut down and shut off everything that you say.
Mhm.
So that's what I would say. And one last thing I would say is, and this part is hard, is that like these things take time, right? Your own growth takes time, and also if influencing someone else's growth, like it's going to take time, especially
Mhm.
for it to
Mhm.
be authentic growth. And so
Mhm.
that's what I
Mhm.
would say with that. And um, you know, I, and hopefully one last thing that I would say is that like I really believe, like I'm right now I'm in a classroom right now, big classroom. um I went back. I didn't make it clear, but I went back into the classroom, working in early childhood, because I want to continue practicing and
Mhm.
just getting better at what I do. When I went to interview, I wasn't looking for the nicest, fanciest school or the highest. I was really looking for a leader. I was really
Mhm.
looking for a leader. I didn't choose a school. I chose a leader.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, because I want to know
Mhm.
that, like, is there a driving philosophy or a force? Like, is
Right.
there
Right.
something?
Right.
Because if you're in a system of things that is counter to what you're doing, then like it's just gonna be tough,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you talk about philosophy. I did a session in Houston about kind of how neuroscience and the right philosophy can really make a big change. And it really is. It's about philosophy. What I would say, and I won't say this too loud because of where you are, but I'm sure there are many people with good philosophies that would love to have you now. So if you ever want to move somewhere around the world, I'm sure you could find a place to go. So we'll say that quietly, though. I want to get to another question here from Chantel, who's actually one of our volunteers and is located in Canada. Chantel says, repair is so important when we do less than perfectly. How do you repair after difficult situations between you and your students?
Apologize. And that's also a really great lesson in teaching them how to apologize with each other. When we apologize, when I say keep your butts in your pants. Don't say, I'm sorry for yelling at you, but you need to listen the first time I tell you. Right. Because that's not really an authentic apology.
If you have a butt, it's not really an apology. I was teaching my son that the other day because he had an apology that had a butt after it. I'm like, leave it out. Even if you think it, you got to leave it out.
Right. And it's hard even for us as adults to do it because if you were lucky enough to have adults in your life who actually did apologize, the apologies I had get is like, dinner's ready. That is the closest thing to an apology I would get. But like, if you did get an apology, it would probably come with a but. And so like, again, we get programmed with the way that like we're raised and the way, how we were brought up. So it takes some reprogramming not to like say that but and just to say like, hey. And the other part of it is to make a commitment to what you're going to do better next time. And so it's not enough to say I'm sorry that I yelled at you. Next time I'm going to next time I'm going to make a commitment to or next time I'm going to take a breath, or I'm going to try to get it, use a different way to get your attention. We'll try to do claps, or we'll try to do, I'll come down on eye level and I'll talk to you, whatever it is, whatever's working. And that's also maybe not even an opportunity to kind of collaborate. It's like, hey, next time, let's do it this way. Let's work it out this way. And just to problem solve for next time. And so that's how when you mess up, that is how you do it. And it's again, also, I don't think I said that mistakes are an opportunity for learning. Not only are they a central part of the learning process, sometimes the mistakes are like if you can really get into a place of being thankful. Now, the moment you're not going to be thankful, you're like, man, you're gonna, you're gonna be going through it. But like in reflection, you can be thankful for the mistake because if you made the mistake, that just means you had an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to reflect. Okay, what can I do better next time? Right.
All right. So one from Australia here. Okay.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. Francisco says, how to initiate an open conversation about how do adults feel when their expectations are not managed?
How how adults feel. So, I mean, first of all, I always, validation. I always talk about validation and like, look, this was hard. This was difficult. Like working with children is difficult. Trying to get a group of children from point A to point B is hard. And I will like really like talk about as much as like go into it. Like, yeah, like I've been there. Like sometimes I get sweating, like you're trying to figure out like what to do. You don't know what to do. You're getting upset. You want to yell at them, but you're trying to find a different way to do things. Like I really get into like the validation. Sometimes I don't even do like problem solving because that may not be what they need, especially if they're really dysregulated. Just like, hey, I see you and I'm here for you. Like that is really difficult. And often what typically happens is when you validate and you don't give someone, a solution of what to do, then like, oh, yeah, I just don't know what to do. They'll most of the times, especially if you have a good relationship with them, normally they'll open the door and say like, hey, look, I just don't know how else to get all 17 kids out the door without anyone getting hurt. Right. I just don't know how to, get them to stop hitting each other or to stop name calling or to do their work or to, sit out and, they'll frame it however they frame it from their perspective. I wouldn't judge them for the way that they ask the question. It may not be the way that you would word it, but then, then that's when I would open up and like, hey, well, that's when the problem solving there's time for problem solving. You kind of open that up and kind of give them some strategies. But you got to be really kind of aware and kind of in tune with the person to know when is a good time to offer solutions and problem solving, and when a person really just needs to be seen and
Mhm, mhm,
validated and just
mhm.
like heard.
Mhm. So I know from your recent session that I attended that you're also a believer kind of in the brain science piece of this and understanding kind of how the brain relates to us feeling regulated or dysregulated. And I happen to be a big believer in that work as well. It seems to me that kind of to that question that um, you know having adults have some of that basic knowledge of brain science, I think, is really can be transformative. When you begin to understand not only the brain and body state of your kids, but your own brain and body state and how it can be influenced by the same things that influence kids, I think it's transformative. I really do. You have any thoughts on that?
Yes, and I want to say not just for kids and not just for working with kids, for all of your
Yep.
relationships in life. When you learn
Amen.
that, like, it's not
Yep.
about just the kids, it's just
Right.
about all
Right. Yep.
your friendships, your spousal relationships, your coworkers, your boss. These strategies, talk about like assertive communication as opposed to going aggressive or being passive. We talk about giving empathy to others. We talk about encouraging others. We talk about being able to, manage your own emotions and keeping your composures and being able to self-regulate. We're talking about all these, being able to see the best in others.
Mhm.
These are valuable skills and powers for any relationship. That's like honestly one of the most like powerful things about it. And I mean,
Mhm.
that's why it works for kids because it really allows them just learning about relationships,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
that's why this is just a long term, strategy. You're not going to
Yeah.
like, hey, I taught them to say, I don't like it when you push me, please touch me more gently. Practicing that with them isn't going to be like, okay, I taught it that to them once and they should be set for life. No, this is ongoing work and it evolves and it becomes more complex, especially as you get older, and as your abilities kind of grow, your skills
Mhm. Mhm.
grow.
Mhm.
But being able to communicate, I just got to say that, for a young child, I might be like, teach him to say like a toddler might teach him to say, stop, and put a hand, stop, right? Learning to kind of hold a boundary, right? Without biting or scratching. For a little bit of an older child, maybe a 3-year-old might sound like, I don't like it. I don't like that. For a little bit of an older child, maybe like 5 years, I don't like it when you push me. Please do this. And we're kind of through the ages teaching them that how to communicate. Hey, I'm not cool with this. This is how I'd like to be treated,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Which adults struggle with. And for adults, even, with and I've seen this working with adults, that even when in our like coworker or adult relationships, we struggle with this kind of communication to
Mhm.
say like,
Mhm. Mhm.
hey, you crossed the boundary. I'm not cool with that. This is how I'd like to be treated. A lot of times, a lot of people go to passive. They won't say anything until they blow up, or they will go, or they'll start off aggressive, as
Right.
opposed to
Right.
really being able to communicate effectively in a
Mhm.
healthy way. And this has real world impact on our relationships and just our general well being.
Mhm. Yeah, we talk about relationships a lot, and of course, I've always kind of felt like, the 3 R's of education, and probably parenting and everything else, as you would say, is relationship, relationship, relationship. But we find that in a lot of our educational settings, a lot of the focus is on compliance and control, and you're not necessarily building relationships or abilities to make choices when everything is being told to you, when you're doing all you're doing is following orders. That's a big mind shift, I think. I think a lot of people look at kids as, I mean, I hate to say this, but almost subhuman. Like kids don't have the same set of rights that an adult should have. And I think I mean, we all grow in this and we all learn more. And I think certainly my ideas have changed on this quite a bit. But I mean, I think the best way to raise a human being is by treating them like a human being, by giving them a sense of choice and agency and listening and being compassionate.
Yeah. I mean, it's the culture that we live in.
Right.
We just live in a culture that it treats children as less than because they don't have I guess the ability to produce. They don't have the same
Right,
skills as
right,
us
right.
adults do because they're still growing and learning, developing, and so
Yeah,
we treat them as less than, and so we see a lot of times we see them as less than, and it has real world impact with on how they're able to grow and
yeah,
develop.
yeah, yeah, and frankly, I mean, probably leads down road to a lot of trauma, and of course, what we know about that trauma is that trauma downstream then leads to, drugs and alcohol, leads to, risky behavior, leads to, even more kind of going down the road. I mean, when you say about kind of making the world a better place, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, I believe that if we can have people feel safe, if we have people feel heard and seen, we're going a long way into making progress. But Chaz, there's a lot of work to be done out there. So it's tough.
Can I say something on that? And so, like,
Yeah.
I don't look at, I talk about world peace, and like, some people might be like, yeah, I know you're on board with it, and you see exactly what I'm talking about, but
Right.
some
Right.
people might be like, oh, that's unrealistic. But I'm actually really practical. I mean, I'm an optimist, but I'm also like
Right.
very practical. I
Right.
know, I talk about world peace, but I know that in my lifetime, like, change takes time. That in my
Right.
lifetime, we're probably not going to get to world peace. I don't really expect that. But
Right.
for me and the work that I'm doing and the work I'm doing, even with each individual child in the
Yeah.
classroom, to the work that I'm doing online, that if I can just push the needle a little bit towards, compassion and empathy and learning and growing children in a healthy way, that I'm just moving the needle just a little bit towards world peace. And
Yep.
then
Yep.
someone else
Yep.
is going to take those lessons,
Hmm.
maybe a child of a parent who's watched my videos, and they're going to take it and they're going to move it a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And the way that looks like in parenting, I make the analogy of just like iPhones, right? Like a lot of us, like if you're embarking on this journey, this is like a huge, especially with all the brain science like
Hmm.
that we have now and understanding that we have about the brain and body. It's like a huge innovation. And so it's like the first iPhone. And so if you're embarking on this journey with this knowledge, like celebrate, pat yourself on the back, like you're the
Hmm.
first iPhone. Now, but it's going to be tough because you were raised by a, like maybe pagers or flip phone or rotary phone. But, but all along, you being that first iPhone, you're going to have software updates. You're going to
Right.
improve,
Right.
improve,
Right.
improve.
Right.
But
Right.
guess what? You're not going to be the perfect iPhone ever. But what is going to happen is that your children are going to take all the updates and all the learning that you've done as an
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
iPhone, and they're
Hmm.
going to build off that, and they're going to be the iPhone 2, and their kids are going to be the iPhone
I,
3,
I love your analogies.
and it's going to build and build and build and
Yeah.
build
Yeah.
until it's like Google Glass or whatever it
Right.
is.
Right. Right.
But we're not meant to break every unhealthy pattern behavior, every generational cycle in our
Hmm.
lifetime. We're just meant to move the needle as much as we can, and
Yeah.
to learn and grow as much as we can, and let the next generation, carry
Well,
the torch.
if we're making progress today, it'll be felt downstream. And I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in make whatever change you can. I mean, if you make a change for your child, that's a positive difference. You make a change for a classroom, that's a positive difference. You make a change for a school district, you make a change for a state, whatever it might be. I've always been a big fan of fan, maybe the wrong way to put it, but the story of the starfish. You ever heard that story about the starfish washed up on the beach? You ever heard that before?
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's real short, but basically, big beach, a bunch of starfish have washed up after a storm. A kid is there picking them up one at a time and kind of tossing them back in the water. And I'm probably not going to get this exact, so bear with me if you know it, people. But somebody, walks along, a older gentleman walks along and sees this kid and says, hey, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm trying to save him. And the guy says, well, there's just too many of them. You're not going to save them all, or you can't possibly make a difference. And the kid throws another one in and says, well, I made a difference to that one. And,
Yeah.
and sometimes
Yeah.
that's where we need to focus. It's like,
Yep.
make a difference for that one, make a difference for your child, your school, your state, whatever you can do. And it's gonna have, and again, it seems like a huge problem, but as we begin to focus and get more people on this journey, I think the better. Let me get to another question here. Sunday said, what impact do you think your race has on perceptions of your message in the positive discipline world?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think people, so I'm gonna say in the Black community, we are very, spanking is very prevalent in the Black community,
Mhm.
and so like, uh, I would, I won't cuss. I'm gonna say this, but
It's
like
okay.
a,
You say what you would need to say.
So like a lot of times, like you talk about like, positive discipline, conscious,
Mhm,
respectful,
mhm,
gentle, whatever parenting. A lot of people will say like, oh, that's white people shit, right?
mhm,
and
mhm.
and so I think a lot of times, no, that's not everyone, right? There's, no
Right.
group is a monolith, but so I think sometimes people will see me and be like, oh wow, like it's someone coming from the black community
Mhm, mhm,
saying like not to hate your kids, and not I'm going more steps further, like
mhm,
this is how, to help children in a healthy way without, any kind of like, without using fear and leaning on
mhm,
fear and
mhm,
leaning on shame. um and I think that is like, oh wow, like that's, and I do think like, okay, maybe I can be maybe a little bit more open to the message, because it's like, hey, because there's this real concern in the black community that like, I said mistakes are a part of a learning process,
mhm,
that like my black child will not be afforded the same mistakes as their white counterparts, right? And so there is a, real concern. And so I think some people just like might see someone maybe preaching the same message, but might have fair skin, and like you don't, immediately say like you don't understand, right? Like you don't get it, like you're not
mhm,
taking
mhm,
the cultural context into consideration with what you're saying. You're only really using your experience as a white woman, a white middle-aged woman, which is tends to be the
mhm,
kind of
mhm,
like
mhm,
the
mhm,
majority of the people in the space. um and so I think that just kind of help kind of spark some of those conversations. And that's a very, I grew up black kid, black
mhm,
male with ADHD. Like
mhm, mhm.
I grew up, I recognize the reality of it. There's another piece to it. I'm not going to get, that's a whole conversation to have.
Sure, sure, sure.
And I've had some of those conversations on my podcast, but what I say is that like really what's happening is like we as the black community has been treated with the same kind of fear and shame and punishment tactics that we use on children. Maybe not the same
Mm,
exact
mm,
tactics,
mhm,
but the
mhm,
same kind of philosophy and methods have been used on the black community.
mm,
And what
mhm,
happens is a lot of times we, to try to save our children, to protect them from the, authorities, from the police,
mhm,
is that
mhm,
we will use those same tactics. But what
mm,
really
mhm,
happens is
mhm.
like that's oppression. And what's
Right,
really
right.
happening is that our black children don't have to leave our four walls to experience oppression. We
Mm,
become the
mm, mhm,
conduit of oppression
mhm.
by being harsher to our children,
Out of fear.
to try to, yeah, out of
Right,
fear.
right, right.
And a lot of times that's what we will cite, that like
Mhm,
it's,
mhm,
I'm trying to protect my children because I'm scared, I'm fearful. But that's that we are causing the harm, as
mhm,
opposed to
mhm,
really we should be the safe space for that child, a place where they can have safe harbor from that oppression that they may experience outside the home.
mhm,
So they
mhm.
have someone to come to. And there's so much more conversation that I can have on that, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, I tell you, we have covered a lot of ground, and that kind of bringing that to the end of our show here, because we're getting to the end of our time, is such a powerful topic, and there you're right. There is a lot to be covered there, and I think so much of what we're talking about. I mean, we often kind of frame a lot of what we talk about in the context of education, but the same things that are problems in education are problems elsewhere. I mean, when I think about the concerns I have around approaches that are very compliance and control based, it's not just in education, it's law enforcement. It's a lot of different places where we're seeing the same approaches leading to a lot of harm for individuals. And often, I mean, often it's the same individuals. I mean, if we look at things like discipline data, we look at restraint and seclusion data, it's kids with a disability, black and brown kids, kids with a trauma history. I did a presentation recently, and it's like you trace that on down, and you can look at the school to prison pipeline and see that we still have a system that's alive and well, that's pushing a lot of young, if you're young, disabled. I mean, and again, that data I was looking at was ADHD, was all sorts of things. You're a young neurodivergent black child, your chance of ending up down that pathway goes up tremendously. And we've got a lot of work to do in a lot of areas, but I think the same principles like you've talked about. I mean, it's all these things. It's in life. It's moving away from these kinds of approaches.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I named my podcast Mr. Chazz's Leadership, Parenting, and Teaching Podcast, because it is all these different areas. But there is some hope that I have seen over the even just in my lifetime that
Hmm.
I've been kind of in this space and been interested. Like I've seen there's more and more of a shift happening just in leadership in general. There where we're using less fear-based tactics in
Right.
leadership across companies, and also seeing data to support the success in and even the bottom line. Everyone's concerned about the bottom line. How are we
Hmm.
going to make money? That the fear-based tactics don't even help the finances,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I was talking one time at an event that I was doing, and talking about kind of the fact that this compliance control, this kind of approach doesn't work, and somebody was kind of arguing with me that it did work, and their example was talking about gangs, and I'm like, it depends on what you mean by work, right? I mean, if you mean you can manipulate human behavior by doing negative things to people, yeah, there's some truth to that, but is that the world you want to live in? No. I mean, it's not the world I want to live in. I want to live in a world where we're valuing and we're supporting and so we've got a lot of work to do. Well, listen,
I know I gotta leave, but I want to leave it with something Alfie Kohn says when people say think something
and
works.
Alfie's one of my heroes. I
Yeah,
love Alfie.
we should ask works to do what.
Right,
I'm gonna
right,
leave with that.
exactly, exactly.
Right.
Absolutely agree with you. Well, I was going to ask you if you had a final word, and I guess that will be the final word. If you hang on for 1 second, we're going to end up here, but I want to keep you on just after we get off for a second. And I just want to thank you for joining us for this conversation today. It seems like it did take too long for us to get this get this on the books, and I'm so glad we did.
Yeah.
This has been a great conversation. I really enjoy talking to you. Love the work you're doing. I mean, you were talking about change in leadership, and the things that you're doing are making a difference, and I really appreciate all the work that you're focused on. So we've had a great interaction. A lot of people were weighing in. Thank you for all of those that joined us. Please again share this with others that might enjoy it. And thank you so much for joining us, Chazz. You stick around for 1 second, and I'll just say goodbye to everybody that's tuning in.
Bye,
Thanks.
everyone.
All right, bye bye.
I'm here, but I'm just gonna